thank you for taking the time to come to this session today. Discussing security and automation tactics, combining them together for an audience after lunch on a full stomach could be a recipe to cure insomnia. I'm hoping my content proves otherwise, but in all actuality, we have a good session for you. I'll start with a quick introduction, introduce myself, and then let you know what you can expect for the next 25, 30 minutes. So my name's Anthony Sabella. I am a principal architect for CISCO Systems, the Enterprise Chief Technology Office. It sounds fancy, but it really isn't. We got a great team, though. It's a collection of SMEs in various different disciplines in data center technology, WAN technology, collaboration technology, and our primary initiative is to work together cross-architecture to try and create new platforms, solutions, strategies that will place Cisco ahead of the curve. And you can probably see on the bottom left there, it says Eclipse. So I'm often asked, hey, can you sit down? Can you move left? Can you move right? I mean, admittedly, with my size, I block a lot of light. So I'm going to do my best to stay out of the way of the presentation, just so you can go home with something useful. So what can you expect for the next 25 to 30 minutes? We'll start with the why before the what, just some trends that are impacting the security landscape. And we've polled a large contingent of our customers, about 500 of our customers, and asked, what are the 3 top concerns that you have today? Hence, creating a strategy around it, which we're going to discuss today. We're going to introduce a concept called intent-based networking, which is going to introduce levels of automation at different points in the service lifecycle. And we're going to combine intent-based networking with cybersecurity into an intelligent closed-loop framework that will essentially address use cases in a more efficient way, lowering risk, improving OpEx, reducing complexity. And then lastly, we'll finish with, Cisco's got a very large global infrastructure. We apply this strategy on ourselves. So we've captured some metrics during the transformation cycle, which I'll share just so you can determine how effective the strategy was. Okay, some trends that are impacting the security landscape here. This is like 3 days worth of content on one slide. So after you see this, you'll have all the information you need. You can go home. But ransomware, you're hearing a little bit about social engineering downstairs, crypto mining. There are 2 in particular. The influx of devices from the Internet of Things on the consumer side and the influx in cloud adoption on the provider side are significantly impacting the network design, and how we choose to secure these networks is largely dependent on the underlying network design. So this trend has essentially inspired 3 major strategies. The first strategy on the left, which is called private first, is how networks were architected for the past 2 decades, where you take your application placement options were fairly simple. You take your app, you put it in your private data center. So that's where you build your DMZ to guard the gold, if you will. You terminate your access connections into it, backhaul your internet over the private WAN. We refer to this as private first, because if you have an app, you put it in your private data center first. Then we see customers moving to something we refer to as cloud all-in, where these customers don't want any private data centers. They're coming to us saying, we don't want to own any data centers. We don't want to own any infrastructure. So these customers are taking the majority of their apps and they're putting them in public cloud, pub IaaS, such as GCP, Azure, AWS, et cetera. For the minority, they'll use internet SaaS. Now, if you're leveraging this strategy, you're building out logical infrastructure and services in the public cloud environment. And to use a poker term, you're essentially POC committed. So you're locking yourself into a cloud provider. So in the event you find more aggressive pricing for workloads or services, it's going to be a bit more difficult to take advantage of them because you're building out all of your logical services in a pub cloud provider that you've already chosen. And that brings us to the last strategy here, which we refer to as hybrid. The majority of customers that we're servicing are choosing this particular strategy. So considering that cloud providers and service providers are co-located in carrier-neutral facilities and or colos, we're leveraging our partnership with Equinix to connect into these cloud services much more efficiently. So instead of running internet circuits to Azure or to your SaaS provider, these are cross connects right into the cages. So increased bandwidth, reduced latency, oftentimes with SLAs, which you can't often get. And this model is essentially buying you the flexibility of choice, regardless of where you want to consume your app. And in parallel, we're leveraging this cloud edge as a hub for consumer provider interaction, which we leverage in some pretty neat ways. So if you haven't heard the term before, consumer and provider, I've said it a couple of times, let me just quickly introduce it. Consumer, the user, the endpoint, the sensor, where everything connects. The provider, the application, wherever it lives, private data center, pub cloud, internet SaaS, and they're leveraging this cloud edge to bring those together. So if we look at the two topologies side by side for a moment, the one on the left was how we architected networks for the past 2 decades, data center centric, where you take your app, you put it in your private data center, has been moving largely to this, what you see on the right. The data center is just another application provider off this application provider wheel, if you will, called the cloud edge, so you can have much more efficient traffic patterns, reduce transport, better user experience. So these changes have brought about a pretty large impact. And we polled about 500 of our customers and got responses back from their CISOs. And the summary is under these 3 categories. First, complex. Multi-vendor, most customers have between 20 and maybe 60 different vendors. So this is yielding a situation where they're spending 3 times the amount on ops, 3 times the amount on operating the network as they did on actually procuring the network. That was pretty eye-opening. Inefficient. Most of the changes are being done manual. 80% of the changes are being done manual. Slow, error-prone, leads to vulnerabilities, ultimately leads to breaches. And then lastly, detect and respond. Since the influx of endpoints that are connecting from IoT and traditional endpoints, and the influx in where you can consume an application, private, public, internet SaaS, has essentially increased the attack surface, which in turn has increased the time to detect and respond. So these 3 were the 3 largest concerns from a large contingent of our customers. So we created a strategy to address these 3. And it's a quote by Charles Darwin: "Not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." So that was the catalyst in the concept for this new strategy, which is called intent-based networking. So intent-based networking is a way to express your intent, take your business intent, translate that into electronic rules, into network policy, and bring a level of automation to it instead of doing changes manually. We're going to be leveraging automation for this. And that's halfway around this cycle, which I'm going to introduce in a moment. On the backside, we're leveraging telemetry, getting constant visibility into all the traffic patterns so we understand how the network is behaving, in which we can start tying actionable responses to behavior, feed that back into the automation cycle, into a loop. So when I say intent, I often get this question: you keep saying intent, but what does intent mean? So for the purposes of this presentation, let's just quickly level set what I mean by intent, and then we'll get into some of the technology here. So as an example, let's look at the top one there, opening a new branch to serve customers. The workflow on the right, there's a large subset of tasks. You need to provision this branch network, configure wireless SSIDs, configure secure access for employees, contractors, guests, segmentation services, QoS classes, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's just a subset of the tasks within the workflow, and 80% of these changes are being done manually. So what we're doing is we're templatizing the workflows for you. So we can increase speed, increase accuracy, improve OpEx. So this is the framework for intent-based networking, and then we're going to start combining this with cybersecurity in a moment. So the framework here is we take your policy, your intent that we just talked about, we express that into an SDN control point at the top, which translates the what into the how and instantiates your services, instantiates your fabric on your infrastructure. Now, instead of configuring all of that manually, we're essentially leveraging workflow-based automation. We're creating templates that are going to be on the SDN control point that you simply just have to fill out. So we're halfway around here. Well, I guess before we get around to the other side, that activation and fulfillment process, we're essentially deploying, operating, and retiring workflows. So this is what we're automating instead of configuring this manually. Now we're halfway around. We've templatized your workflows. We've instantiated your workflows on your infrastructure. But how do we know the intent that we expressed into that SDN control point? How do we know it's being maintained? Well, we don't, unless or until we enable telemetry on the services on the infrastructure going northbound, which we feed into an automation platform and or a SIM if you have it from a security perspective. So now we're able to examine the behavior in which we can tie actionable responses to the behavior, feed that back into the SDN control point. That's the loop. That's what we refer to as intent-based networking loop logic. That concept, intent-based networking, is what we started, that's the underpinning of the solutions that we start creating. So as an example, let me just give you an example. We've taken that intent-based networking concept and created a solution called software-defined access, or SD access. So as you can see, it's got an SDN control point, a policy engine, and an analytics platform. Take the intent, express it into your SDN control point, fill out your templates. It will instantiate your fabric for you. Single fabric for wired, wireless. So instead of configuring that manually, now this is all workflow-based automation. And to ensure that intent is being maintained, we enable telemetry going northbound, collect that so we can examine the behavior, tie actionable responses to it, feed that back into the control point. Now this is being leveraged for traditional endpoints, Windows, Mac, iOS, mobile devices, Android, etc. But additionally, the fabric is being extended for lights, for cameras, for sensors. So we're essentially extending and scaling policy to the non-carpeted areas and doing this without additional management overhead because it's the same SDN control point. We're just creating the templates for you. So you might be thinking, well, this is supposed to be security. Well, where's the security in it? The neat thing is we started embedding security into the SDN control points. So as an example, identity-based policy and segmentation. What we're doing here, let's see if I can manipulate that once more. So what we've started doing is decoupling policy from location. So as an endpoint, doesn't matter what type of endpoint, doesn't matter what type of user, as soon as that endpoint attempts to gain access, it's going to be queried by a traffic cop, answers the who, what, when, where, how, takes that information, aggregates it, and assigns a tag to it. That tag that you see that just got pushed down to the endpoints represents three things. Represents your identity, represents what you have the ability to communicate with, your authorization privileges, and then lastly, it's a form of micro-segmentation. So you cannot move horizontally. Because oftentimes with malware, if you have malware, the first thing it's going to do is it'll do a ping sweep to see who's on the network. And then against those endpoints, it'll run a port scan, see what ports are open to try to manifest itself over to it. All of that is prohibited with this tag. Additionally, it pushes something called VNs or virtual neighborhoods, which is a layer 3 form of segmentation. analogous to VRFs, if you're aware of those, or VRFs. So all of this policy has now been embedded into the SDN control points, into the workflows. So we've identified the most common workflows for this environment and started templatizing them. So administrators now can deploy their intent across a single fabric without having to worry about, what's my wired policy? How about my wireless policy? Darn, I got to secure this as well. All of that is baked into the workflows. You can see the point of this is to increase speed, increase accuracy, improve your OpEx. So we've taken that premise, that intent-based networking premise, and created solutions per domain. An intent-based networking access solution, which we just went through, an intent-based networking WAN, one for data center, and that new Cloud Edge pin that you saw, one for Cloud Edge, and started embedding security into those SDN control points to start improving OpEx. So the three major challenges that our 500 customers reported back to us, complexity, inefficiency, time to detect and respond, we've created this 4-step strategy to combat it, which is going to essentially organize the different levels of automation and then bring them together. So we just refer to them as digital principles. One will be integrated architecture, 2 will be trusted access, 3, integrated assurance and threat detection, and then the last one, which will be the fun one, is the dynamic security protection. Now, I don't expect any of this to mean anything to you, but we'll take that strategy, and now we're just going to put this on the network visually for a moment, just so you can kind of see how this is going to start taking form. Then we'll go through each one a little bit closer. So the first part is we take the network, obviously on the left-hand side, users, endpoints going through an access to a WAN, and before you hit your application providers, whether it's a private data center, pub cloud, internet, or SaaS, you're going to leverage this Cloud Edge. This Cloud Edge could be a private data center, could be a Kara-Nutra facility. That depends on the company's goals and current posture. Now, instead of configuring each one of these points manually, we've integrated the architecture. We've now are going to be leveraging SDN control points. Take that policy at the top, your intent, and it's written to, I wonder if this has oh, maybe not. And it's written to the network. And so what we've done is we've embedded security into the SDN control points. So instead of configuring this manually, we're leveraging automation, at least for the deployment perspective. The second point, trusted access. You probably heard a lot about this lately, or zero trust. This is essentially a way to establish trust through a framework. Confirm the user identity, the device security, and take those two and combine those with context to provide secure application access, whether it's public or private. The SDN control points, now this last piece, or this, I should say, third piece, the integrated assurance and threat detection, this is where we're reading from the network, ingesting security telemetry, and taking this telemetry, combining it with third-party event feeds, threat intelligence databases, et cetera, and providing this visually so you can improve your forensic investigation time. And we leverage the last point, leveraging that information to tie actionable responses to it. So dynamic security protection, giving the admin the ability to start extricating themselves from day-to-day operations. So I just got flashed that I got 10 minutes left, and since I started late, I'm gonna see if I can kind of get through this in the 10 minutes that we have allowed. Integrated architecture, the first step. In lieu of going through each one of these technologies and putting you to sleep, we just essentially categorize the security technologies according to network, endpoint, and cloud. We take that network, endpoint, and cloud, and we connect it to a common threat intelligence database. All the products are essentially configured to communicate with a single threat intelligence database. As well, we have created a single landing spot portal to see and understand or provide a lens into your security services across your network diameter. We have a ton of those security products that you just saw, and we had customers coming to us saying, It's too difficult to pivot between all these different products. Do you have a single landing spot that we can have a lens into how our security products are behaving? Do you have a way to aggregate this data? So we've accepted that call and created that. And then the last part is the ecosystem of different partners, providing APIs, more robust APIs, because we realize not everybody's network is all Cisco, right? So the trusted access piece, moving on to that piece. This is the framework for trusted access. 3 major parts: confirming the user identity, the device security, and taking that, combining it with context, and using that to provide secure application access, regardless if it's public or private. So the main ways that an endpoint will come on the network, whether it's you're coming in via wired, connecting to a wireless SSID, or coming in from the outside, we just front end that with a traffic cop. Answers the who, what, when, where, how. Who are you? Where are you coming from? What time of day are you coming in? What is the CVSS score of the endpoint you're using? Is it even secure? Have you registered with an MDM? Because that's one of our policies that you have to do that, as an example. Take all that information, aggregate it, assign a tag to you, and then we have a session directory. It's a lot of useful information. That session directory is shared with our own products and with third-party products. The integrated assurance and threat detection piece. I think most of us have these questions on the left. Is this bad? Did it affect us? How did it get in? Where did it come from? What is the scope, essentially, against all these technologies on the right? So is there a way to automate that part? So we've found a way to aggregate and correlate security incidents across those vectors, the network, endpoint, and cloud, with this single landing spot portal, having a landing spot that's got an API into each one of the technologies and can aggregate and correlate that data together. As an example, to give you a visual illustration, all those questions that you just saw, we pull together that event data, the alert data, with APIs into each of the technologies. We combine it with the threat intelligence data database, as well as third-party feeds, and we essentially take that information, aggregate it into an intelligent data set that you can use to improve your time to detect and present it visually with the ability to respond. This is the cool part of it. What is all this coming to? Is this part, the dynamic security protection, leveraging these different levels of automation for something. That something is providing the logic or the ability for administrators to begin extricating themselves from normal day-to-day operations so they can concentrate on more business critical issues. So as an example, the network, we're bringing a level of automation to different use cases using this framework. As an example, segmentation, what we discussed in the beginning, as an endpoint attempts to gain access, the traffic cop will examine it, answer the who, what, when, where, how, assign a tag to it. That tag represents not only its access, but also its segmentation. But now you're already on the network. What happens if you start misbehaving? So we can leverage that same type of methodology here, where the integrated network, once it detects a threat, we can invoke a flow through our policy platform to quarantine the user. So this can be a manual process, or this can be an automated process. Just depends on your goals and your posture. Again, providing the logic to the administrator to begin extricating themselves from these normal day-to-day use cases. Another one for breach response, I think this is a very common one. If malware happens to pass the initial lines of defense, if you will, since we're leveraging an integrated architecture which has got APIs into different technologies, we can usually detect that in a little over 3 hours if you compare that against the industry average of nearly 100 days. Now, the solution, the integrated solution, keeps track of all of your files, what the file is, what it's doing, where it's going. So the moment it exhibits malicious behavior, we can fire an alert. And that's the cool part, is we can tie actionable responses to the alert. So as an example, we can remove that malware from all of the endpoints in the enterprise automatically, and we can also push a block to the various security elements you have. Push a block to your web gateway, your email gateway, your firewall, your router, your IPS. If you see this file traversing the network, kill it. So again, common use cases, tying actionable responses to behavior, leveraging automation to improve OpEx. So we've taken this strategy, those 4 digital principles, and applied it to CISCO globally, which took nearly a year. And the complexity inefficiency part, we've taken tens of thousands of access control rules and leveraged group-based policy, that tag method, and then automated those rule sets and uncovered and resolved over 50,000 errors across the full network diameter during this transformation cycle. Now, instead of going to each one of the routers and firewalls and wireless controllers and IPS devices, et cetera, and configuring those manually, now we're leveraging SDN control and embedding security in it. So leveraging that level of automation saved 8,000 man-hours during this transformation cycle. The detect and respond piece, which is the back half of the cycle, ingesting the security telemetry and tying actionable responses to behavior, which we're doing, that allowed us to improve our mean time to detect, mean time to respond tenfold during that transformation cycle. So I know I'm right about the time, I'm getting flashed. So if this strategy or any of the components or technologies sound interesting, feel free to pull me aside, or my email address is in the presentation. Reach out. I'm happy to answer questions.